Jill Sitnick, so good to see you. Today's episode is very interesting. Can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Francesco, I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right, so Jill, you are the author of Rescuing Jill, a personal retelling of a healing childhood trauma-induced PTSD with psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. Talk to me about your backstory and what inspired you to write this book.
Well, in a nutshell, I was diagnosed with PTSD from child abuse trauma in my mid-40s. Totally had no idea. I mean, I knew I had a bad childhood, but I had no idea I was holding on to that trauma. And I was going the traditional route of talk therapy and antidepressants, prescription Wellbutrin. They were not working. And by sheer luck, my therapist was working to become a psychedelic-assisted psychotherapist and was very familiar with MDMA therapy for PTSD. MDMA is most commonly known in the rave scene as Molly or ecstasy. At the time, there were clinical trials. There was a phase 2 clinical trials at the website maps.org, maps.org, that showed 2/3 of the people who went through the clinical trials at the end of 3 administrations of MDMA therapy, they no longer qualified for a PTSD diagnosis. That actually aligns with my experience. 1 year, 3 administrations, I no longer qualified for a PTSD diagnosis. And because the therapy works, it works so well, I went ahead, I wrote the memoir, which is that year of healing, the 2 steps forward, the 1 step back, but also why I chat with lovely people like yourselves to explain what this therapy is, to take the stigma away from psychedelics. Because trust me, when the idea first was introduced to me, I was like, I'm not doing that stuff. And meanwhile, it was transformational in my life.
Nice. And it almost sounds miraculous how it only took just three administrations.
Yeah.
And it must have taken a lot of courage to go to something that it's still so heavily stigmatized. Psychedelics are very stigmatized. But I wonder, did you have any backlash from choosing this method of therapy? And how did those in your immediate circle reacted to your decision to use psychedelics?
No backlash. The people with whom I'm close had an inkling of my childhood. One of my best friends knew a lot about my childhood. One of the signs that you have PTSD from child abuse is that you don't tell anybody about your childhood. Okay. Did not know that. I didn't tell anybody about my childhood. It just was not a source of discussion. But one of my best friends was in a counseling program, and she wound up using me a lot. I got a lot of free therapy in my early 20s.
Nice.
Because she had a lot of assignments to do. So she wound up learning quite a bit about me. When I told her about this therapy, she was a little hesitant because she hadn't heard about it. The other side of the coin, she knew I still had a lot of inner child work to heal. And she's like, I'll support you, whatever you need. I hope this works. Go for it. I had 0 backlash. I can't say that my friends are super conservative, though. So
it helped.
Yeah.
Nice. And as much as I know you're not a medical professional, so as much as what you can tell me from what you've been through the therapy, what makes psychedelics or MDMA so special when it comes to treating or curing mental disorders such as PTSD or trauma?
Yeah. So just to lay the background for your viewers and listeners, in the States, the FDA has listed MDMA as a breakthrough therapy for PTSD, has listed psilocybin as a breakthrough therapy for anxiety, and has listed LSD as a breakthrough therapy for depression. So our government understands that these components have a way of working that is better in the preliminary trials than anything else on the market. Breakthrough designation means that they're going to kind of fast track drug development. The irony is that MDMA therapy for PTSD was delayed by the FDA in August for a couple of different reasons, which we won't dive into. I say all that because different psychedelics have different mechanisms that are being studied to work with different diagnoses.
Right.
MDMA for PTSD is not your classic psychedelic. MDMA is an empathogen. That's one of the reasons why it's a fantastic party drug. It decreases your fear, so your social anxiety is gone. It makes you want to connect. You got a lot of serotonin in your brain. It has a bit of methamphetamine in it. So if you have a heart issue, you should stay away from MDMA or ecstasy.
Right.
So that keeps you dancing and keeps you awake. For a trauma patient, those empathogen traits, they calm the body down. And I always put my hands on my shoulders because I think like my shoulders were up to my ears my whole life. They calm the trauma patient down. Like I was terrified of my father. So I was hyper vigilant. Calms the body down. It also makes me want to connect with my doctor. I had my therapist and my guide. So it makes me want to connect a bit more. And for the first time in my life, I was able, my body was calm enough that I was able to admit I was terrified of my father and that I really did think if he was in the room with me, he'd have his hands around my throat. So MDMA works by kind of calming everything down, ironically. Other substances work like your more classic psychedelics. They work a bit more visually. They are a little bit more disruptive to the psyche. Guiding on an MDMA journey is, you can have a regular conversation like this. Guiding on a psilocybin or LSD journey is very much the patient is in charge. You're there like navigating with them.
Right.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
And it's so good to hear that they can really be so helpful because people need to to remember that something that is very often overlooked is that traditional medication for depression or PTSD, such as SSRIs, come with severe side effects themselves, such as manic episodes or even suicidal thoughts, not to mention the severe dependence on them. I would even go to the lengths of arguing that they are meant to be addictive so that you can never stop treatment and to stay a permanent paying customer to Big Pharma. So thinking that traditional methods got your back might not always be the case.
Well, I mean, there is something to be said for big pharma, a bit concerned that all of a sudden something comes on the playing field that 3 administrations over the course of 6 to 9 months can actually heal a person enough to no longer need antidepressants. And could that be very disruptive to a business model? Sure.
To the unexposed who only associate these drugs with addiction, junkies, or homelessness, it might sound, a bit reckless to try heavy drugs, let alone to believe that you can heal from them.
Right.
Are there any potential risks or side effects to trying such alternative forms of therapy? And what do you say to people who are wary of any risk or side effects?
So, first of all, there are different classes of, and I'm going to put drugs in quotation marks. In the U.S., Schedule I drugs got put on this big, giant umbrella. So you have MDMA that already has clinical research, 3 clinical trials with over 2/3 of the participants no longer qualifying for PTSD. You have that chemical labeled as a Schedule I, and you have heroin, which is incredibly addictive and obviously destroys lives.
Right.
So there's an imbalance in terms of the umbrella, and psychedelics in general are not addictive. So it's very hard to get addicted to MDMA because it depletes your serotonin. You don't feel great. It's not the kind of thing that you can take every single day. psilocybin or magic mushrooms lose their potency if you take them too often. So it's kind of hard to get addicted to those things as they are. If you have an addictive personality or something leading that, can it possibly happen? Sure. But psychedelics in general are way different in profile than like an opioid or a heroin or some sort of hard street drug that gets you addicted after one or two uses. And I'm kind of ignorant in that world, so I can't even list what those things are. The other side of it is that most people don't know that. Most people just look at the umbrella of Schedule I. It's a drug. And so by me speaking out and chatting with lovely people like yourself, I'm hoping that by telling my story and sharing that there's over 200 clinical trials in clinicaltrials.gov that deal with psychedelics and mental health, that this is a $1 million industry already. We have several companies in the U.S. that are racing to be the first one to be FDA approved. They are already lobbying our legislature to have trigger laws so that as soon as the FDA approves, they can start selling their version of a psychedelic. It's projected to be a $1 billion industry in several years.
For sure.
Like, just because it's a niche right now, it's going to be very different in 5 to 10 years. Did I answer the question? I just realized I may have went on tangent. I'm so sorry.
No, that's fine. That's good enough. That's good enough. Especially, I think, when it comes from people such as yourself who are more down to earth, and obviously they don't do these things to, indulge in their gratification and recreationally just,
No, this was...
So it's I'm sure it makes people feel more comfortable and maybe reconsider. Maybe there is something to it more than the very scary stories that they've heard around these substances.
Right.
Can you please walk us through how a session of MDMA-assisted therapy look like with the preparation and everything?
Absolutely. So most people understand it easiest if they think about a surgery. So you know how you have to prepare for a surgery? You have to go to the doctor a few times. You might have to eat differently. You might have to do a couple of things. Think of that as 40%. In my process, that 40% was meeting with my therapist and guide, identifying what I needed to work on. For me, it was all about fear. Identifying my intentions. Why am I so scared? And really just trying to chip away at where was that fear coming from, and answering all of my questions and feeling very safe with my therapist and my guide. And usually MDMA therapy has 2 facilitators with 1 patient. So that's why my therapist and a guide. That's 40%. The actual day, consider that to be 20%, like the surgery day. And I'm purposely choosing surgery because that's a long day for everybody. My MDMA journeys lasted anywhere from 5 to 8 hours. So it's me, my therapist, and guide in a lovely space. My journey space was lovely. It had multiple areas. It had a little seating area. It had a little dining area. It had a little mattress to lay down. It had a bunch of blankets. It had beautiful art. It doesn't exist anymore. The building got torn down, but the developer bought the property. But it was lovely. It was a lovely bunch of spaces. And we're there. I take the medication and it just unfolds. And MDMA allows you to have regular conversations like we're having right now. And, you're there the whole day. And then the same way that right after a surgery, you then have to heal. And that might be eating different, stretching, walking, exercising, physical therapy. In psychedelic world, it's called integration. And it's where you start to see the insights that all the stories you lived with your whole life, that were formed in childhood, you start to see them from your adult perspective, and you shift. You shift your beliefs, you reframe. So for me, my father, and this memory right here, my father beating me when I was 3 years old, and my dad was a big guy. He was 6'2", 230 pounds. So he's beating me when I'm a toddler. As a toddler, I couldn't understand that my caregiver was being cruel to me. So my toddler made that the universe. The universe is always against me. I'm not good enough. I'm not lovable. It's my fault. As an adult, I'm looking at this memory of this pathetic man beating up on a child going, not my fault at all. And so I'm shifting the beliefs, I'm shifting the emotions, and that's how the healing process works. So 40, 20, 40, prep, day, integration.
Nice. And I'm glad it worked out so well for you, really. It's very important to know for the listeners that trying these drugs recreationally won't necessarily heal you from anything you're going through, since it requires the guidance and monitoring of a professional, as you just said, along with the purity of the quality of the drugs,
Yes.
as well as being very, very intentional with the process.
Right.
Speaking of process, what would you say was the most challenging aspect of your therapeutic process?
The most challenging was we had been making a lot of progress. My first journey, my inner children, learned what the process was. I figured out the reframing. My second journey, I was excited. I was like, I know how this works. Going to get a lot done. And then I had a nightmare. So around March, so my first journey was September. My second journey was December. My third journey wasn't until May, because in March, I had a nightmare of me as a little girl, about 5, being trapped in my childhood home. My mother had attempted suicide multiple times throughout her life. When I was 5, she tried to commit suicide with a shotgun. And there was a lot going on at that time, and my father and I walked in on it, and boom, boom, boom. I had this nightmare. I'm trapped in my childhood home. Where the door really was, there was no door. And so my therapist and I were kind of working through this nightmare wouldn't go away. And my therapist and I were working through it, and we're trying to get visualization, and we're trying to talk to that little inner 5-year-old. Why won't you leave this house? And I was an English major. I love using my imagination. Like, this really works for me. If anyone's familiar with IFS, internal family systems, we used a lot of internal family systems. It's all about parts work. It's about like your inner children, like talking to that 5-year-old. That 5-year-old would be a part. I take very well to that kind of therapy process. And so why couldn't we get her out of the house? That was a real stumper. That's why it took so long until that third journey. And even in that third journey, started off with MDMA. About halfway through the journey, we still couldn't get that the door would not show up to that house. We couldn't get that little girl. I was basically my subconscious was withering away in this house that I was petrified to be in. And my doctors, the solution was, we had already talked about it. They gave me a very small dose of psilocybin, magic mushrooms, probably less than a gram. And the combination of the magic mushrooms with the MDMA, it's called a hippie flip, actually broke open my childhood home. And I found myself in a garden, very safe, very warm. Wow. So that was the most challenging and the most healing. Like, my subconscious was trapped in my childhood home, which was fueling all of the fear. I needed to get out of there.
Nice. And it actually makes me think that perhaps the most healing moments are the most challenging. If it was easy, maybe, we would all be freed of everything that's haunt us, but perhaps the challenge is what makes it maybe more significant, overcoming that challenge.
Yeah, anyone who's listening, psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy means you're going towards the painful stuff.
Not running away from it.
You're not running away from it. You're re-feeling it. So when people talk about bad journeys in a therapeutic sense, very often, and I've had a few, it's because you are you're finally processing some of those awful emotions from the trauma of when you're young. And that's, that takes a level of commitment.
Right. What do you think traditional talking therapy failed you when it comes to overcoming your trauma or any trauma in general? Why hasn't been successful for you?
I think it's really interesting how you phrase that. I think two things. And this is totally Jill's opinion. I am not a doctor. I don't play one on TV. Number one, talk therapy is the horse and buggy on the country road when compared to psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, which can be the zippy sports car on the highway. It can just move a lot faster.
Okay.
Secondly, what I have found, so after my MDMA therapy, my doctors actually moved out of the area. So I wound up continuing to work on my trauma, even though I no longer had a PTSD diagnosis, which was lovely. I had 19 years of trauma and neglect. And so I continued to learn about other psychedelics and how they work with trauma via tourism retreats. So I've worked with MDMA, psilocybin, Bufo and 5-MeO. Bufo is from the toad, 5-MeO is the synthetic. They're the same thing. Everyone use the 5-MeO. Let's leave the toads alone. DMT, Iboga, Hoppe, boom, boom, boom. I've worked with a bunch of them, LSD. And what I have found is that when you are working with intentionality and really digging, you can uncover the base of the trauma that you didn't even know was running your life. Like I just healed a trauma point last November that I didn't even know was fueling my life. Like I knew something was wrong. I understood I was having like real trepidation about getting into a relationship. Like my long-term partner had passed. I had another relationship. And then I stopped dating for a while. I was like, why am I attracting people who are emotionally or unavailable? I had to kind of figure it out. I don't know if 10 years of talk therapy would have ever gotten me to the place that an LSD journey took me right to the trauma spot when I was a kid after my mom shot herself. Like, I think there's just a direct arrow that can work with psychedelics with intentionality that just isn't there with talk therapy. And that's in no way, shape, or form. I mean, I still have a therapeutic relationship with my therapist. We integrate together all the time. This is no offense to her skill level. Psychedelics just seem to get into the subconscious in a different way than talk therapy does. Talk therapy alone. There's lots of other modalities that also get into the subconscious.
Right. I agree. Yeah, it helps resurface all those things that you've been running away so many years. So yeah, it's quite quicker and more convenient
Yeah.
doing that.
And direct. Like I was shocked at how
Very
good
direct.
that LSD journey was. Actually, I said it was like a scalpel. It went right in there.
And after that, how long the integration periods were, and how did you know when the integration was done? Did you just trust it, the time period the specialist gave you?
During my therapy, during the MDMA therapy, my doctors let me take the pace, control the pace. In the clinical trials, because I think they're constrained by time and money, they only did a month in between administrations. My doctors let me go. I got to say when I was ready for a next one, obviously with their guidance. And so as I was reframing those memories, I always kind of hold my hand up because the memories were like on TV. If the memory was coming up and I could reframe it, I was good. If I was getting triggered and no memory was coming up and I wasn't doing any more reframing, but I still had fear, that's when I knew I needed another journey. And that's how I also knew that I no longer had the PTSD diagnosis because I was no longer that hyper vigilant, terrified of everything. Did I still get triggered because I had lots and lots of trauma? Yes. I was just not at that PTSD level of being suicidal because I was just so scared of everything and just lack of control.
Could you please elaborate on maybe how the integration looked like? Did you use any tool, any practices such as meditation? What exactly did that constitute?
Yeah. Integration is very personal. Anybody who says that there's a certain way to do it, you, in some way, shape, or form, need to get in touch with your brain. So for lots of people, that's meditation. For me, it requires activity. I have a picture on my website of my dog, Sadie. She passed last year, but she was like my integration partner because I would do a ton of integrating while walking. And, I had my phone and I would voice record what I was thinking. Right after a macro dose of a psychedelic, the connections are firing. It's like pop rocks. Like you can almost not keep up with all the reframes. So I always had my phone and the voice recorder with me as I was walking. A lot of people will play music, and that's their artistic way because that kind of puts them into a brain space. Some people like art. I say whatever works for you as long as you're giving yourself an openness to allow for your brain to reframe. The worst thing to do, in my opinion, for integration is to immediately go back to work. Like, if you're going to invest in this kind of therapy, give yourself a couple of days, because right after the therapy is when your brain is really doing a lot of reframing, and then it kind of starts to close in. Like after like a week or two, it kind of starts to close in. Your neurons are kind of, okay, we're going to settle in a little bit. But if you go back to work immediately, you're not giving your head space to be able to work on those reframes and things of that sort. So in my opinion, it's whatever activity you do that allows you openness and just processing. For me, it was walking and exercise. But other people, it's meditation, whatever works. Journaling. Right. It's always good to capture it because you'll, believe it or not, you'll forget. I sometimes have to go back and be, oh my gosh, that is really how I thought. Like you'll forget that you actually thought about life in the way that you did. So try to capture it however you can.
Nice. And the way I see it when you said don't go back to work, it's also you are getting back into your old routines and habits and the identity that you had before your enlightenment or before the release you just had. So instead of recreating and reinventing this new self of yours, you're going right back to who you used to be, who you are trying, you're trying to live back in the past. So definitely take some time off to whoever is thinking of doing this. Are you aware of anyone else who went through a similar journey such as yours that you talked to? Or if so, if there is any common theme when it comes to results in this kind of therapy?
You know what the common theme is? Everybody, and so I have facilitated at least 4 MDMA sessions with folks. Okay. And I know other people who have had MDMA sessions. And the common theme is, oh my gosh, I see things so much more clearly now. It cleared the cobwebs. Because ultimately, a lot of our stories, how we see the world, were created when we were kids. Think about how imagine talking to a toddler. What kind of crazy stories are you going to get from a toddler? And yet, a lot of how we learned how to navigate in the world was we absorbed like crazy when we were little kids. And so what we find with really any psychedelic, but you asked me specifically about MDMA, is people the 2 or 3 days afterward, they're like, I never saw it like that before. I can't believe it was right in front of me. That's really the way it was. And I had this whole story in my head. So that's the biggest thing. And you'll find too with other psychedelics, usually, and that's why you'll hear practitioners talk a lot about, well, what's the story that you're telling yourself? Or what's the story that you believe? Because is it a story that was made when you were a child? Or is it an updated version of the story that you had that you can craft as an adult?
Yeah, in my personal experience, I call it the clean state. So you're like a baby again. So you're ready for your synapses to fire these new connections that never existed before. So definitely like a clean blank state that is ready to, just rewrite whatever you want to, whatever beautiful thing you want to become.
Yeah. Yep. Oh, that sounds, Carhart Harris talks about the skiers. Like if you are the mountain that has the ski grooves, I'm not a skier. I'm probably messing this up. You got all the grooves from the skiers, but the psychedelic is the blizzard that just kind of erases all of those grooves and you get to make new grooves. I think that's a great way for people to think about it.
No, that's a nice one. Yeah, that's a nice one. So I'm curious, have you felt the need, desire, or mere curiosity to consume these drugs again after your healing?
Oh, okay. So I get asked this a lot because, again, the stereotypes of psychedelics are drugs.
Mm.
Really, your classic psychedelics are inherently not addictive. I have zero need for any psychedelic. I would say on a quarterly basis, I clear the cobwebs by having some sort of journey, maybe a little bit more just because I've been facilitating and I'm in my third wave psychedelic coaching program. So we just had our intensive in October. I went and facilitated another retreat in December. So maybe things have been a little speeded up just because of my education stuff right now, but on average, like once a quarter. With that said, ketamine in the U.S. has been approved for treatment of depression, and ketamine outside of a clinic absolutely has some addictive qualities to it. So I caution people with ketamine. But like your psilocybin, your LSD, your MDMA, those as themselves don't promote addictive behaviors. Again, can somebody who has an addictive personality or something going on really crave something? Absolutely. But it's not like we all know opioids. Opioids create addiction.
Right away.
The psychedelics we're talking about don't inherently create addiction.
And after you open your mind to this kind of therapies, have you maybe done something like ayahuasca retreats that are maybe perhaps more spiritual and way, way more potent than, I assume, a psychedelic-assisted therapy?
Well, what I have thoroughly enjoyed is understanding how different psychedelics work with trauma. After my doctors moved, they both went up north. I have no idea why they went up into the cold. I decided to, whenever I was able to travel, go on psychedelic retreats. So those were my opportunities to work with additional psilocybin, to work with DMT, to work with Bufo and MEO, to work with Boga. Sometimes in the middle of a jungle, sometimes at a beautiful high-end resort on the ocean. Sometimes in like a basement in New York with a bunch of yoga people. Like it has varied. And what I'll say is my therapy was very trauma-based. As I have continued to work on myself, the experiences have absolutely vacillated between spiritual and trauma in a really interesting way. I can totally say my spiritual side has opened up it's blossomed in a beautiful way, along with, as recently as November, I was still healing trauma points. So two things can be happening at once. It doesn't have to be one or the other.
And are you religious? Or were you religious before you tried psychedelics?
I was not.
You were not.
I didn't become spiritual until my mother died. And then weird things started to happen. And then when my partner, Carl, passed away, really weird things started to happen. And then in some of my psychedelic experiences, I like to make fun and I like to say they got very woo-woo very fast. Absolutely lovely, beautiful experiences. And I don't have a fear of death anymore. I have a fear of the pain of death, but I don't have a fear of the death process. I have a very different view of the universe. So it has been a lovely discovery. It's a side benefit, to be honest with you.
Hmm. So, obviously, despite overcoming your trauma, what has been the most beautiful part of your journey?
You know, the privilege, and it is a privilege. I'm very much aware I was privileged to be in the right place at the right time to receive this therapy. I received it underground. I am very much aware of my current economic privilege, the color of my skin privilege, to be able to have this conversation with lovely folks with like you, to be able to explain what this potential healing modality is for millions of people. And so for me, that's really the gift. You know, if I wasn't, I'm very privileged in that I planned very well and I lived below my means for most of my life. So now I'm in a great situation to be able to advocate full time and pivot my career to be doing this. And so the gift is I was able to be healed. And so if I can in any way, shape, or form help people along their path and anybody gets any sort of benefit, then in some way, shape, or form, it was worth it.
Jill, what is one thing that you wish people would ask you more often when it comes to your journey? Or perhaps what other podcasters have failed to ask you?
So I think what happens sometimes when I'm explaining the process is there's still this little hope, or this, even though I talk about the 40-20-40, there's still this, oh my gosh, it works so quickly. I really always want to stress that this therapy is not turnkey. You're going to see a lot of marketing claims in the future. Even if you go on Retreat Guru right now, you're going to see every retreat claiming they heal PTSD, addiction, boom, 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 without any real direct evidence of it. So what I wish we would have a little bit more candid conversation around the marketing of this, because it's not turnkey and it's not just going down for a weekend and getting 2 or 3 psilocybin journeys and then just coming home to your real life. It is an ongoing process. But I think that's the biggest thing, that this is a complete procedure versus a turnkey 10 years of therapy in 8 hours. And I get concerned that when this becomes more mainstreamed and approved, that the marketing engines are going to make it sound way more turnkey than it is.
Right. Yeah, I can definitely see there being more malpractice when it comes to these fake promises and, or perhaps, just blatant lying to
Yeah.
what can happen, because it's not one size fit all. Not everyone will get treated. Not everyone will get healed. For some people, it might even feel it got worse. So, yeah, I think your message is very, very important.
Yeah, psychedelic work is not for everyone. There's lots of contraindications. I was screened thoroughly, completely, no schizophrenia in my family, no mania. My heart was fine. Like, there should be a really obnoxious intake form. If there isn't, it's a red flag. There's lots of reasons. I would say on average, I convince 75% of the people who ask me questions not to work with psychedelics. So
Okay.
it's definitely something to research and be fully informed about before jumping in, because it's not turnkey and you really want to know what you're getting into. So I appreciate that question. Thank you.
Right. No, thank you. Okay, so Jill, final question. What is the biggest single thing you want to be remembered for?
I was like, oh,
It doesn't have to be related perhaps to your journey or to the message that you're giving. Is as a person, what do you want to be remembered?
I started my career as a teacher. I was an English teacher. And even when I went to big tech, I was all about teaching. I think I'd really like to be known as someone who was able to teach people so they could then lead their best lives. Like, that I can in some way, shape, or form provide something to others to allow them to be their best selves and then create those ripple effects. I guess in some way like a change agent to help folks. I should really think about a better way to answer that question.
No, I like it because every time I ask this question, it's fascinating. Almost always, if not always, it's about serving others. So no one makes it about themselves. So it makes you think when it comes to higher purpose, it's always about serving others. So perhaps there is something to take home there.
Yeah. I mean, that's the joy. It's funny in my coaching program, people talk about the different clients they want, things of that sort. And I've always been, I mean, I was in district office for years, like big tech, like I'm very comfortable at that corporate level. And I've always said, I'm ready to coach clients who they can make lots of ripples. That I want the leaders, I want the folks that when they do great things for others, it continues to grow. And so I'm really excited to kind of work with folks like that.
Well, I'm glad that there are people like you out there just helping others and, really doing the right thing. Well, Jill, you've been lovely. Thank you very much. I hope people can take as much as I got from this conversation. And I'll see you next time.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This was fun.